I live in a small town in the Appalachian Mountains, surrounded by dense forests and hidden waterfall. There's not much to do here except explore the trails and dirt roads, but there's one special place everyone knows about: Whisper Falls. The waterfall got its name because they say that when you approach it, all sound around you seems to disappear. It's a mystical place where people go to swim, fish, or simply enjoy nature. The most famous spot is Destiny's Leap, a natural rock platform from which the bravest souls jump into the crystal clear water below. To get there, you need to follow a winding trail that snakes through the thick forest. The path is marked by landmarks: Size Overlook halfway through, and Shadow Gorge near the destination. Throughout the hike, you're surrounded by vegetation so dense you can barely see the sky. On that fateful day, it was me, my childhood friend Tom, his older brother Mark, and our classmate Sarah. Bored, we decided to go to the falls to fish and relax. Mark, always cautious, brought his hunting rig, as the area is known for bears and wild boars. On the way, we met old Bill in the town square. His eyes, clouded with age, seemed to see beyond us as he recounted the legend of the falls. "They say there's something there," he mumbled, "something not of this world." The old-timer spoke of a portal, a passage that appears from time to time. People have gone missing there, you know? And those who came back, they came back different. And today's the day that portal will reveal itself. We laughed nervously, but his words planted a seed of unease in our minds. We reached the trailhead around 4 p.m. The sun had already begun its lazy descent on the horizon when we started our journey. As we advanced through the woods, a strange sensation began to envelop us. It was as if we were being watched. Sarah was the first to express discomfort. "Are you guys feeling this too?" We exchanged apprehensive glances. But Mark, trying to keep calm, joked, "It's probably just some curious critter. Don't tell me you're afraid of a little squirrel, Sarah." We continued walking. The feeling didn't pass. The forest seemed to swallow all familiar sound. The smell of damp earth and decaying leaves invaded our nostrils, mixed with a strange, almost metallic odor. When touching tree trunks for support, our hands encountered a sticky film of moss. The sound of the waterfall in the distance was more of a whisper than a roar, as if the water itself feared drawing attention. When we reached Shadow Gorge, putrid smell invaded our nostril. It was like a mix of mold and rotten meat. Instinctively, we pulled out our flashlights and scanned the surroundings. That's when Tom shouted, "There, what's that?" We followed the direction he pointed, and a few meters away we saw something I'll never forget. A grotesque creature emerged from the vegetation, dragging itself towards the river. Its skin had a sickly brown color, and its body was covered in roots and dry branches. The legs were long. The arms, too thin to be natural, ended in sharp claws. Paralyzed by shock, we watched the creature approach the riverbank. In a fluid motion, crouched and leaped, easily crossing the good 15 feet width of the river. It was at that moment that Mark reacted, firing his rifle repeatedly at the being. The shots echoed through the forest, breaking the supernatural silence that had settled. The bullets hit the creature several times, the sound of impacts echoing through the gorge. We expected to see the thing fall, be torn apart by the force of the shots. But nothing happened. The creature remained motionless, as if the projectiles were nothing more than raindrops hitting its grotesque skin. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the metallic sound of empty cartridges falling on the rocky ground. Then, slowly, almost with deliberate calm, the creature turned to us. It was at that moment that we saw its face, and I understood the true meaning of terror. Its face was a living nightmare, an abomination that defied all logic and sanity. Large, milky eyes occupied much of the flattened face without eyelids, fixed in an empty yet intensely aware gaze. There was no nose, only two slits where it should be, opening and closing like the gills of a fish out of water. But the worst, without a doubt, was the mouth. It was a huge opening that cut across the face from side to side, filled with rows upon rows of razor-sharp teeth. Teeth were irregular, some too long, others crooked, all stained with a dark red that could be nothing but dried blood. Two prominent canines stood out, reminiscent of the fangs of a venomous snake. The mouth opened in a grotesque smile, revealing a throat as black as a bottomless pit. The creature emitted a sound that froze our souls, a mixture of a mountain lion's roar and a rattlesnake's hiss. But there was something more in that sound, something that spoke directly to the most primitive part of our brains. It was the sound of death, predation, the primordial terror that our ancestors must have felt on dark nights around campfire. At that moment, I understood why they called that place Whisper Falls. Compared to that sound, any silence would be a welcome relief. Then, to our absolute horror, the creature began to advance towards us. Its movements were a living contradiction, fluid like water, but at the same time erratic and unpredictable. Each step it took in our direction seemed to double the distance between us, as if reality itself was distorting around it. The smell of rot emanating from it grew stronger with each second, a nauseating mixture of decomposing flesh and something chemical, almost metallic. "Run!" I shouted, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. I didn't need to repeat it. As if broken from a spell, we all turned and started running desperately along the trail we had come from. Mark, still in shock, almost forgot his rifle. Mom pulled him by the arm, forcing him to move. Dara was already ahead of us, her fear giving her a speed I never imagined she possessed. At the height of terror, as the creature advanced towards us, I noticed something strange. Sarah's necklace, a family heirloom she always wore, began to emit a faint glow. The creature hesitated as if it had encountered an invisible barrier. For a brief moment it seemed to retreat. Later, Sarah told me that the necklace was an ancient protection amulet, passed down through generations in her family. Could there have been more to that jewel than mere superstition? We raced back along the trail, stumbling over roots and branches, fear giving wings to our feet. The path that had seemed long and tiring before now passed like a blur. We didn't dare look back, fearing to see that thing chasing us. The sound of our labored breathing and branches breaking under our feet was the only thing we heard, besides the frantic beating of our hearts. As the creature approached, I noticed something strange about its skin. It wasn't just the sickly coloration or the abnormal texture. There were patterns, like scars or ancient tattoos, that seemed to move and change shape. At one point, I thought I saw symbols reminiscent of Egyptian hieroglyphs. At another, they looked like modern binary code. It was as if the creature's skin was a living canvas, telling a story that my mind couldn't comprehend. I don't know how long we ran. It could have been minutes or hours. Time seemed to have lost all meaning. We only stopped when we reached Mark's pickup, which we had left at the trailhead. We were panting, trembling, covered in cold sweat despite the chilly night air that had already fallen. No one said a word as Mark, with violently shaking hands, tried to insert the key into the ignition. As Mark started the engine, an inexplicable impulse made me look back one last time. What I saw made my blood freeze in my veins. There it was, standing at the edge of the forest, partially hidden by the shadows of the tree. Its milky eyes glowed in the twilight, fixed on us. A macabre smile seemed to form on its monstrous face, as if it was enjoying our terror. That moment, I was absolutely certain that this wasn't the end. Somehow, I knew we would meet again. The roar of the pickup's engine broke the spell. Mark accelerated, the tires skidding on the damp earth before gaining traction. We sped off down the dirt road, violently shaking with every hole and irregularity in the terrain. Nobody spoke. The only sound was that of the engine being pushed to its limit, and our still labored breathing. Each of us was lost in our own thoughts, trying to process what we had just experienced. We arrived in town in record time, the streets deserted at that hour of the night. Without discussion, we all silently agreed to go to Mark's house. No one wanted to be alone that night. We parked the pickup haphazardly in the driveway and ran inside the house, locking all doors and windows behind us. Only then, in the relative safety of the familiar living room, did we allow ourselves to collapse. Sarah was the first to break the silence, her trembling voice almost a whisper. What was that thing? No one had an answer. How could we explain something that defied all logic and reason? Mark, always the most rational of the group, tried to find an explanation. Maybe it was some kind of mutant animal, or a collective hallucination caused by toxic gases from the cave. But his voice lacked conviction, and we all knew that what we had seen was too real, too terrible to be explained so simply. On that endless night in Mark's house, we tried to rationalize what we had seen. Sarah, always the most spiritual, insisted it was some kind of forest guardian spirit. Mark, skeptical, argued that it could be an unknown species, perhaps a remnant from the age of dinosaurs. Tom, still in shock, mumbled about aliens and secret government experiments. Me? I didn't know what to think. Each theory seemed both plausible and absurd in the face of the horror we had witnessed. We spent the night awake, gathered in the living room, all lights on, jumping at every noise. Mark's house, a small property on the edge of the swamp that borders the forest, suddenly seemed terribly exposed and vulnerable. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to move, and every time we looked out the window, we expected to see those milky eyes staring back at us. Around midnight, our worst fears were confirmed. We heard that terrible sound again, coming from the direction of the swamp. It was unmistakable, that mixture of roar and hiss that had haunted our nightmares in the few hours since our encounter. The creature had followed us, was out there somewhere in the darkness, watching us, hunting us. The panic we felt at that moment is indescribable. Sarah started crying silently. Tom mumbled incoherent prayers. Mark frantically checked if all doors and windows were really locked. I found myself paralyzed, unable to move, my eyes fixed on the window, expecting at any second to see that horrible face pressed against the glass. We spent the following hours in agony, listening to the sounds of the things circling the house. Sometimes it was just a rustling in the yard vegetation. Other times, it was heavy footsteps on the porch. The worst were the scratches, long, slow, deliberate, on the exterior walls and windows. It was as if the creature was playing with us, torturing us psychologically, making us imagine the moment when it would finally decide to enter. When the sun finally rose, bringing with it the promise of safety that daylight always seems to offer, we ventured to leave the house. What we found made our blood run cold. There were deep marks everywhere, on the walls, on the doors, even on the roof. They were long, deep scratches made by absurdly sharp claws. In some places, the wood was almost completely perforated. The worst was on the front door. There, carved into the wood with frightening precision, was a symbol. It looked like a kind of spiral, but with strange angles and lines that seemed to move when you looked directly at them. Looking at that symbol gave me a headache and a feeling of nausea, as if my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. In the days that followed, we tried to return to normality, but it was impossible. Fear was always present, a constant companion that followed us like a shadow. We slept poorly, haunted by vivid nightmares where we found ourselves back in that forest, chased by that thing. During the day, any unusual sound made us jump. The shadows seemed deeper, more threatening. A week after the incident, I returned to Mark's house. He had replaced the front door, but the old one was still there, leaning in a corner of the garage. I stood looking at it for a long time, my eyes tracing the contours of the deep scratches, my mind replaying the events of that terrible night. It was at that moment that I realized a frightening truth. Our lives would never be the same again. In the weeks that followed, Tom began to change. Sometimes, in the middle of a conversation, his eyes would suddenly widen, fixed on an empty point. "Can't you see it?" he would ask, his voice trembling. "It's there, watching us." But there was nothing. He developed an irrational fear of running water and refused to enter any area with trees. Gradually, Tom isolated himself, consumed by a terror that only he could see. Since then, I have been researching tirelessly, seeking answers. I read old folklore books, interviewed the town's oldest residents, scoured historical records. I discovered stories similar to ours, accounts of encounters with strange creatures in the forest that date back hundreds of years, always near Whisper Falls, always involving that spiral symbol. I delved into the dusty archives of the municipal library, searching for answers. Among yellowed pages of old newspapers and forgotten diaries, a pattern emerged. Every 27 years approximately, there were reports of mysterious disappearances in the Whisper Falls region. Some bodies were found weeks later, horribly mutilated. Others simply vanished forever. And always there were mentions of strange sounds in the forest and a spiral symbol left behind. Some say the creature is an ancient guardian, forest spirit enraged by human intrusion. Others believe it's something from another world, something that came to Earth long ago and made that forest its home. There are even those who say it's a physical manifestation of humanity's sins and fears, taking form in the depths of the woods. Truth is that I don't know what that thing was, and I pray to never encounter it again. But one thing is certain. There are things in the depths of our forests that defy human understanding. Ancient and terrible secrets that perhaps are better left buried. Because sometimes, knowledge comes at too high a price. Since that night, we haven't returned to Whisperful. Neither us, nor anyone from town. It's as if a tacit agreement had been made. We don't invade its territory, and it doesn't invade ours. But sometimes on the darkest nights, when the wind blows from the direction of the forest, I could swear I hear that sound again, that roar hiss that still haunts my nightmares. The town was never the same after that night. Tourism, once the main source of income for the town, practically disappeared. No one wanted to visit the creature's town, as we came to be known in the surrounding areas. The residents became more reserved, distrustful. Amulets and protection symbols appeared on almost every door. At night, the streets were deserted. Everyone locked in their homes, fearing what might be lurking in the darkness. Last night, almost 3 years after the incident, something happened. I was on the porch of my house, contemplating the edge of the forest as I always do before going to bed. That's when I saw it. 2 points of light in the darkness, like eyes reflecting the moonlight. For a second, I smelled that putrid odor again. When I blinked, it was gone. But I know what I saw, and I know what it means. It's still out there, waiting. And I have the terrible feeling that our next encounter is closer than I imagine. Last week, old Joe, who lives on the outskirts of town, came to the sheriff's office with a strange story. He found deep marks on the ground of his property, as if something huge and heavy had passed through there, and carved into the bark of an old oak tree near his property line was that same spiral symbol we had seen years ago. The news spread through the town like wildfire. People started locking their doors earlier, and parents kept their children indoors after sunset. The atmosphere of fear that had begun to dissipate over the years returned with full force. As I write these words, I can't shake the feeling that we're on the brink of something. The 27-year cycle is almost complete. The air feels heavy, charged with an unnatural electricity. Even the animals seem restless. Dogs bark at nothing, and birds have gone unusually quiet. I've decided to do something that might be considered foolish by many. Tomorrow, at dawn, I'm going back to Whisper. I need answers, and I have a feeling that's where I'll find them. I've prepared as best I can, armed with knowledge from years of research and a few protective talismans suggested by the town elders. If you're reading this, it means I haven't returned. Let this serve as a warning and a record of what happened in our small Appalachian town. There are things in this world beyond our understanding, ancient and terrible things that lurk in the shadows of our fort. To anyone who might come across Whisper Falls in the future, beware. Listen to the silence, watch for the spiral, and if you smell that putrid odor, run. Run and don't look back. Because in the depths of those woods something waits, something that defies explanation, something that brings terror to Whisper Falls.